to hire workers and do other good things that are economic. The next story I'm going to tell you is that of Denmark, an example of climate legislation done right and a concrete counterexample to claims of economic gloom and doom. In the early 1990s, when Denmark instituted a carbon tax and started participating in the EU emissions trading system, its unemployment rate was 13.8%. In 2008, that rate was 2.6%, and in the global recession, it never went above 4.2%, which is less than half of the United States' 10% unemployment rate. If you're going to talk about jobs, look at Denmark. Denmark was named by Forbes the world's best country for business. Its GDP has grown over 40% since 1990. It was named the world's happiest country, although I don't know what that is. In short, the economy has boomed and the environment has come ahead too. Denmark's greenhouse gas emissions have dropped by 14% since 1990 in the midst of these strong economic indicators, and its energy use has remained constant. 14% greenhouse gas reductions. The connection between this economic growth and environmental benefit in Denmark is the boom in renewable energy. Denmark went from 99% imports of energy to complete energy independence, and they now get 30% of their electricity from renewables. Despite the fact that it's a tiny country, their wind industry makes up a third of the globe's total industry, powers over 40,000 homes, and brings in $4.7 billion in exports. This success came directly out of government involvement, carbon taxes, tax breaks and subsidies, and guaranteed payment to wind companies. Was there a cost to the government in the short run? Yes, but look what it did in the long run. The lesson here is this. At best, Denmark's climate policy helped cause its economic success, and at worst, it certainly didn't get in the way. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you have the United States. We've seen these cries against environmental regulation before, and the place we saw them was Detroit. In 2005, U.S. auto companies sued the state of California for increasing its fuel efficiency standards, when with U.S. requirements only about half of the 45 miles per gallon required in Japan and the 47 miles per gallon required in the European Union by 2012. Automakers claimed that making their cars more efficient would bring down their companies with these high costs. So they didn't. They kept making their gas-guzzling SUVs, and when oil prices spiked, 3 years later, they were bankrupt. Despite several economic studies, including one by the Union of Concerned Scientists in 2001 telling them not to, Detroit stayed on their inefficient path, they fell behind the rest of the world, and they paid for it. University of Michigan economists estimate that fuel efficiency standards in Denmark would have increased, in Detroit, would have increased the profits of these auto companies by $3 billion. But by winning the fight against climate legislation, Denmark lost the fight to stay competitive. By Denmark, I mean Detroit. And now the Congressional Budget Office reports that auto companies will use $25 billion in federal bailout funds that you and I taxpayers are paying to, quote, establish facilities to produce advanced technology vehicles that meet certain emission and fuel economy standards. They're trying to catch up in this global industry they fell behind in because the United States environmental regulation was behind. The lesson here is this. Detroit took a major risk by following this high carbon path in the world developing low carbon efficient technologies. Detroit lost. If the United States stays on its current path, it's taking the same risk to a much higher degree. After what happened in Detroit, do we really want to have an entire U.S. economy stay on this inefficient, high carbon path while the rest of the world makes the transition to clean energy? Can the American economy really afford to miss out on clean technology when the San Jose Mercury News calls it, quote, the biggest market opportunity of all time? We've talked about these numbers before. 9 billion people in the world by 2050. Standards of living rising. Already $7 trillion in energy markets. Someone will provide clean energy to these people and make a lot of money doing it. There's a reason why companies like GE, Shell, Exelon, and PG&E have gone out of their way to support climate legislation. They know they need it to compete. Government investment has driven the U.S. economy before. We talked about the internet. The internet boom, huge private companies like Google, Yahoo, and Microsoft, came only after 3 decades and billions of dollars of government investment in research, science, and technology. These companies, the millions of people they employ today, their billions of dollars in profits, they're the payoff of decades of committed policies by the U.S. government, like the wind industry in Denmark. And for the United States, clean technology is the new internet for the 21st century. Look, on this side of the debate, we do believe that the benefits of averting catastrophic climate change are enough to pass climate legislation. But even if you want to ignore those staggering likelihoods that all scientists talk about, You can ignore the island nations in the Pacific that will go underwater, the hundreds of millions of refugees, the catastrophic weather events, and the droughts that will exacerbate starvation in Africa and some of the poorest regions in the world. Even if you take into the fact that every major science institution in the world warns that these are the consequences of inaction, and somehow you manage to throw that out the window, we still must pass climate legislation because we need it to bring the U.S. economy into the 21st century.
You're here.
Okay. We're going to have one question and then one question from the audience. So make it count.
The best way to spur growth in an economy is by forcibly taking some people's money and then giving it to other people to spend. That's what you want to promote.
Okay, well, first of all, also, I really had this thing I wanted to tell you, Dakin, but I didn't know. Okay, because I know you're going to get up here and talk about individual freedoms. Interestingly, cap and trade came out of the theories of an economist named Ronald Coase from the University of Chicago, and Ronald Coase is one of the most admired economists by libertarians and conservatives because all of his policies revolve around individual freedom. And that's the theory of cap and trade, is that we believe together that there's a problem that's hurting lots of people and that needs to be addressed. And so by assigning property rights to people, you maximize their freedom in deciding how to deal with the problem. And so, like, we can disagree about whether the problem needs to be dealt with, but I would argue that that's the way to maximize individual freedom while imposing costs.
Do you want to answer his question?
Oh, right, sorry. What was that?
So his question is...
That's all right.
No.
I'm going to just talk about what you just talked about, so it doesn't matter.
Okay, wait, I really want to answer
his question was...
Is the best way to spur economic growth by forcibly taking some people's money and giving it to other people?
Okay. Well, in most instances, I agree with you, the free market maximizes economic growth. I mean, if you look at like those, the two curves you see in Econ 1A, there's no little like deadweight loss in the triangle. But the thing is, by government investment in research, and so the market failure that Andrew, I think, talked about, which is a lack of investment in research and technology, does decrease growth in the long run in those industries because more investment can benefit all the companies in the industries by taking advantage of the learning curves, the economies of scale, and getting to these things is what drives the growth. The second quick thing that I really want to mention is that the reason that a lot of times that's necessary is because of something called first mover advantage. Michael Porter, a Harvard Business School economist, the most quoted professor in economics, talked a lot about this. Anyway, right, so the point is, if other countries impose these regulations first and the United States eventually gets around to them, that's a lot worse for the companies in the United States because they weren't working on it earlier and they come into the market at a great disadvantage. And so, yeah.
Okay, so can we take a question from the audience? Yeah, you've had your hand up for a really long time.
Yes, thank you. So I completely agree with our three panelists here that America should really get on board with this new legislation because I think America, we have international prestige and a say in this world, and if we say that we are progressing in every other aspect, whether it's our economy or our human rights record, then absolutely we should get on that.
Ask a question.
Okay, so my question is, what is the short term and what can we as Stanford students do in the short term and long term level to like help out with either green energy or raising awareness about the issue or anything of that sort?
Teryn, do you want to take that?
I mean, the great thing about this issue is there's so many different ways to approach it. And this is a massive new industry, and whether you're an entrepreneur or you're a policymaker or you want to be involved in all kinds of different ways, you want to be a scientist or an engineer, there's so many ways to do this. I think being at Stanford, given that we did really lead the information technology revolution, being Stanford students, I think one of the most critical roles we can really play is really leading the clean energy revolution, trying to drive forth innovation in these technologies as much as possible. So that includes every stage of the innovation pipeline, from basic research and development to demonstrating, deploying the technologies, to being on the entrepreneurship side, like some of you in this room already are. So I think there's lots of ways we can do that. And if you want to work on the policy side, I'd love to talk to you about it because all the three of us are working to advance